We're live. Excellent. Good. Good. Let the stream flow through you. Just a moment. All right, so that's taken care of. Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins-Treworgy, also known as Baron Sidious. This is Break Time Story Time 27, and tonight I'll be presenting part 5 of The Pen is Not Mightier, an Amelia City story, as well as a little other palaver, chatter, what have you, whatever you'd like to call it. It is Sunday. It is the last day of my work week. Looking forward to getting the hell out of here tonight and going home for my weekend. And it's going to be a strange kind of punctuated week because I come back Wednesday and then I took Thursday off for Halloween in order to take the kiddos out trick-or-treating and then to give out candy once we get back because my young ones are going to be going out with the first batch of kids, and my oldest daughter, she's going to be going out with her friends on the later round. So it's unfortunate, but she's gotten to that point where she'd rather spend more time with friends in terms of her free time than with her parents or younger siblings, but it's natural. That's going to happen. Can't help it. Can't stop it. But anyhow, let us proceed then with the presentation, shall we? Yes. The Pen is Not Mightier, Part 5. To be honest, I'm not sure how I got back home, Carla said as Steve brought in their coffee. And my prints should have been all over that apartment. I wasn't exactly careful about what I touched. That's beside the point, the detective said, handing her a mug. They were in her apartment 2 days after the murder of Todd Baker. As soon as he had gotten her message, Bush had grabbed a couple of uniforms and headed over, discovering the dead man in an otherwise neat and tidy apartment. There had been no prints to speak of, and there was nothing else that could tie Carla to the scene. There was no evidence that she had even been there. How that was possible, Bush couldn't say, given what she'd told him about that afternoon. The point is, we're dealing with something out of a Clive Barker novel here, Carla. This Roderick or Cliff or whatever it is that we call him, he's clearly not human. Stranger seems an appropriate word for it. Yeah, she replied dimly, sipping her coffee. He's not going to stop, you know. We have a protective detail watching Mary Lister's house, and another one at Lyle Cole's. Those are the next 2 names on the list that he showed you, right? Carla nodded. Then he can't get at them without us knowing about it. Stephen, she snapped, almost slamming her mug down on the coffee table. He jumped into a fucking mirror. I doubt he needs to use normal means to get into somebody's home. The detective sighed, pacing the room for a minute. Well, there isn't much else we can do, he said feebly. We'll catch him, whatever he is. He's got to make a mistake somewhere along the line. I just hope it's soon and before we end up with another pile of bodies. They only visited briefly beyond that, Bush heading home to grab some sleep before taking a watch that evening at Lister's house on the city's north side. Once he was gone, Carla reviewed her notes for perhaps the 100th time, trying to make sense of what the stranger had revealed to her. After another read-through, she decided it was time to do a little online research. Surely someone else in the metro had heard of these creatures. Where before she would have written them off as wackos, she was now convinced that those were the very sorts of people that she needed to seek out. It was time to take a dive into the deep end. Well, shit. It's almost too easy, the stranger thought, sliding out of the mirror into the woman's bathroom. As soon as his boots touched the tile, though, his spurs jangling, he realized how wrong he was, sensing the officers just outside of the house. One of them, he knew, was the detective that he had tried to warn off. Damn it, detective. I told you to keep away, he muttered to himself. I told you. The stranger snuck out of the bathroom, using his trickery to silence his footfalls and creep downstairs to the first floor, quieter than a mouse as he moved. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, letting his otherworldly senses roam. There's one in the backyard, one out on the street, and one right out on the porch. Bush is in his unmarked car up there. He might yet live. But the stranger's anger at having been set up like this was palpable, a metallic taste like blood in his mouth. He would not spare the detective if he attacked again. The stranger could feel the officer on the porch's heat through the front door, just to the left upon exiting the house. He drew his blade and unlocked the door, moving with the quiet stealth of a snake. Amelia's city's finest weren't all that fine, as it turned out. The stranger named Roderick was able to open the door and slash the first officer's throat open before the man could so much as recognize that he was under assault. Over the side of the porch he leaped, scurrying around the side of the house to the backyard, taking no trouble to silence his movements now. The second officer hadn't quite cleared his firearm from its holster when the stranger hurled his blade into the man's face, dropping him like a sack of grain. Roderick stomped over to the fallen officer and yanked his weapon free, grunting as he was struck in the back by what felt like scattershot. The stranger wheeled about, bearing his sickly smile at Detective Bush, who was chambering another round in his combat shotgun. "Drop the weapon!" Bush shouted, his voice accompanied by distant sirens. "I have backup on the way right now. It's over," he continued. Roderick understood immediately. Bush hadn't trusted that 3 mere humans could bring him down, so he assigned units nearby in the event the stranger showed up. He had also, it would seem, listened up about the relative weakness of his revolver. "Well, you're not so dumb after all," Roderick said. "And it's always good to have friends who can do some of the heavy lifting, yeah?" "I said put the weapon down," Bush commanded, steel threaded in his voice. The stranger felt a newfound respect for the officer at the sound of that steel. Too bad, really, he thought. "Sure thing," the stranger said, dropping the blade. He put 2 fingers in his mouth and loosed a piercing whistle, then slowly raised his hands to the back of his head. "Oh, and Steve, I did try to warn you," he said. Stephen Bush took 3 steps toward the stranger before pausing to take a quick look over his shoulder. Skittering toward him across the darkened yard came something that looked like a Frankenstein mix of a giant cockroach and a hawk, a winged, chitinous monstrosity, reeking of peaches, a mouthful of gnashing teeth bearing down on him as it leaped to strike. Bush managed to fire 1 blast into its underbelly, but its momentum carried it into him, dying but not yet finished. Though the creature didn't inflict the mortal bite, the 3 kindred creatures that joined it more than made up for the effort, tearing the howling detective apart into bloody chunks as Roderick stalked back into the house to do his duty, blade in hand. There was no challenge in it here, though, his target never rising from her painkiller-fueled sleep as he entered the bedroom and stabbed her through the head. As he was entering her bathroom, he let out a tired sigh. He hadn't wanted to kill Bush, but it was one of the rules. If a human interferes too deep, they die. The stranger named Roderick wondered once more just how long he could do his duty and pass out of the human world. Turn down the radio. Carla had grown up, like most people did, believing that the worst monsters in the world stalked their prey after the sun went down. The darkness of night suited the predators of the world, offering natural concealment and protection from the forces of justice. As such, when she came from her bedroom bleary-eyed and still half asleep, it didn't even register that there was someone sitting in her living room. She passed into her bathroom and did her business, coming out and halting at the end of her hallway, sleepiness quickly evaporating. The stranger named Roderick sat in her armchair, a slumped posture speaking of his own fatigue, his eyes half-lidded under the brim of his traveler's hat. His mouth was little more than a thin, grim slash line in the middle of his face, his jaw clenched tight. Carla considered backing away, hoping that he hadn't seen her yet, off to his side. Wishful thinking is for fools, she thought, rubbing at her eyes. I thought I was supposed to find you, she said, her mouth dry, voice muzzled. Circumstances have changed, the stranger drawled. You should sit down. I have bad news to deliver. Carla was still not yet fully awake, despite her thudding heart, so she shuffled in her pajamas over to the couch and settled down onto it, curling herself up into the corner farthest from the creature in her armchair. So, what's this news? Are you going to stop? Because that would actually be great, she quipped with a nervous, forced snicker. The stranger turned a grim look on her, his eyes narrowing even further. I have my duty, woman. I have told you this. No, I am not going to stop, he said with a sigh. He didn't sound precisely enthusiastic, which Carla made a quick mental note of. Ms. Marsh, last evening I slaughtered several of this city's law enforcement officers. One of them was your friend, Detective Bush. Carla gasped, her entire body tightening, the last vestiges of slumber completely fleeing. Her hands had come up to her mouth out of reflex, her fingers bunching them into fists. I am truly sorry, ma'am, but he tried to interfere. One faint sob escaped her, and before she knew it, Carla was curled into the fetal position on that couch, weeping loudly into a throw pillow that she had pressed her face down into. The stranger said nothing more for the moment, made no effort or move to try to quiet her down. He offered neither comfort nor condemnation, only sitting there silently radiating an unnatural violence and resolve. Carla didn't carry on too long, getting herself under sniffling control in just a few minutes. She sat up, hands clasped together in her lap. Did you make it quick, at least? She rasped. I didn't do it with my own two hands. I am ashamed to confess, said the stranger. I sicked a couple of critters on him. They did what beasts do, he added, sounding resigned. You must understand, I took no pleasure in it. The stranger stood up and walked over to the lone window in her living room, looking down out over the street. In truth, I admired his courage, his devotion to his duty. But when my path is crossed, those who do so, they must brave me and must deal with the consequences. Talking with his back to her, the stranger didn't see Carla rise from the couch and snatch up a pen from her end table, creeping up behind him. She gripped it in a downward stabbing hold, and as he finished speaking, she let out a barbarous roar and swung the pen down, stabbing him in the upper back. His reaction was instant, a whirling backhand fist that caught her flush on the jaw. Carla grunted and staggered back, her hand to her face as her legs struck the coffee table, and she sprawled out atop it. The stranger groaned as he reached back and yanked the pen free with a bloody staring at it like an alien piece of technology. As Carla struggled up into a seated position, panting and holding her face, he calmly opened his hand and let the pen drop with a plastic clatter on the floor. "Not the wisest idea that you've ever had, Miss Marsh," he snarled, baring his yellowed teeth at her. "And it's the only free shot you get. You come at me again, and I will end you." The stranger rolled his head around, cracking his neck loudly, and eased himself back down into her armchair, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just stabbed him. He really isn't human, she thought. Amelia is a madhouse, and I'm just another inpatient. Carla skittered back into her position on the couch, shrinking as much into herself as she could. She once thought she could handle anything the world could throw at her. Everything to do with the stranger threw that idea overboard, with cement shoes. "I believe you still have questions for me, though I'm sure that just now you're not thinking about them," the stranger said calmly. "That's to be understood. You've just suffered a tremendous shock, mentally and physically. If you need a few minutes to compose yourself, I'll wait here." Carla said nothing, slowly extricating herself from the couch and slinking off back to her bedroom. She shut the door behind her, taking in several long, slow breaths to steady herself. A brief look around the room revealed nothing she could use as a weapon to defend herself, other than another pen and a pad of paper. "My sword and shield," she muttered to herself, grabbing them off of her nightstand. She would play along, but she didn't want to stumble through this. If she went back out into her living room without any questions prepared, she had no idea how long the creature would stick around. She wanted him gone as soon as possible. Combined with his seeming limit to how much he would say at any one time, she estimated that 4 good questions might get rid of him. For now, she thought. She jotted down one question right away, which was simply, "Why a knife?" Her next question came quickly as well. She paused then, thinking on something that he had revealed the last time that she had spoken with him. Her third question flowed from her pen, and she headed back out to the living room, confident that these 3 questions would be enough. The creature had taken out his blade and was staring at it, turning it this way and that slowly, admiringly. As she came around him, the stranger sheathed his weapon and sat up. "Actually, I was going to ask you about that. Why the knife?" The stranger cleared his throat and pursed his lips, then replied, "The blade is mine weapon, granted to me by Lord Quoth. It is my primary tool. It is part of who I am. It's made of something quite rare. All strangers have a weapon that is native to them. Mine is special, you see." "How so?" she asked. "The handle was carved from a ghostwood tree, a rare specimen, not found in this world," he said, running one finger along the handle. "The blade itself, well, is made of something unique, something far more potent than any material that one could imagine here. It is carved from one of the teeth of the master, he said, leering demonically at her. It can cut through, well, just about anything. And cutting is the least of what it can do. Carla felt the impulse to follow that up for details, but she recognized what he was doing just before opening her mouth. He wants me to waste questions. He has a limit of some kind, like a genie from its bottle. Okay, she said, jotting down more notes. You said the first time we spoke that your name used to be Cliff. Why did you change it? The nasty smile disappeared as quick as a flash, and the stranger shifted in his seat. A stranger does not choose their own name upon rebirth, he answered. That is given by the eldest of us. He named me Roderick. The names we are given mean little, if anything. They are merely a way of identifying us as new things, different than we were once in human life. Carla wrote down his reply almost verbatim, then cracked her fingers, preparing herself for her final question. You've mentioned these other strangers before. How many are there, and who are they? The stranger gave a tut-tut and waggled a finger at her like a schoolmarm. Now, Miss Marsh, no doubles in this game of ours, he said. Right now, there are 7 others, 8 of us total. The number fluctuates at times, depending on what happens. You see, we can be killed, Miss Marsh. It is extremely difficult, but it can be done. Sometimes there's more of us, though I have not witnessed that myself. More than enough to carry out the will of our master. Now, he said, grunting as he rose, our time together for today is at an end, my lady. Fret not, though. I've got 4 more targets yet. I'll come visit you after each one. The stranger made his way without another word back down her hallway to the bathroom. And Carla knew the moment that he was gone from her home. The sense of barely restrained violence vanished with him. And that is where we will wrap for tonight. So, if there is anyone watching the show, watching the stream right now, who has any comments or questions, by all means, I can attempt to give answer. We've got a few minutes before I've got to head back in. Evening, Lucian. Yeah, last night's shift went well enough. It was a little bit botsy because we had a big Halloween costume contest shindig for the guests here at the casino, and there were a lot of folks who were done up for Halloween. A lot of impressive costumes. Although I gotta say, the 3 most common costumes that I saw repeats of throughout the evening were Joker, Harley Quinn, as one might expect, and Beetlejuice. I saw several of each. And the thing that I found curious was amongst the Jokers, there was a group of five fellows. I can't remember, actually, it was 5 or 6 fellows who they were in a group together, and they were all different representations of the Joker. There was one fella who was done up like the Jared Leto Joker. There was one fella who looked like he was clearly going for the Jack Nicholson Joker. He did a great job. There was a Heath Ledger look-alike Joker in the group, and there was one fellow who was done up like Arthur Fleck, Joaquin Phoenix. And the last guy, I couldn't quite place it, but it seemed like he was trying to go for one of the animated series Jokers. It was a neat little group that they had, trying to kind of present the various representations of the character. Or at least I thought it was entertaining. But by far the best costume for my liking, what I thought was the most impressive, there was a fellow who came down the retail hallway that I was in charge of maintaining last night, who was in just like, it looked like a perfect real world one-to-one replica of Mega Man, the Blue Bomber. It was gorgeous. And when he was walking down the hall, I could hear the metallic clink of his boots, of his feet. And I asked him, I was like, "Excuse me, sir, did you buy this getup? Did you have somebody did you commission?" He's like, "No, I built it all myself. It's PVC piping and plates that I carved and shaped." And he had like these heavy duty cloth segments joining portions of the armor over the joints so that he could bend and move around pretty loosely. It was impressive. I was quite taken aback by it. And he had the helmet, and he had installed a little blinking light that he could control with a little LCD like control switch that he kept in his pocket. It was pretty neat. Unfortunately, team members are not allowed to take pictures of the guests, because I would have loved to have taken some shots of some of these costumes. It was impressive. But yeah, it was all right. The shift went all right. Lucien, thanks for asking. Any last question? Because I am gonna finish this up and get back in, sir. You'll turn back on. Oh, and by the way, I did find out what the hiccup was last night. It wasn't Rumble. It was my phone. It was all AT&T phone service in this area. There was a minor, like 5-minute glitch across the entire network. Anybody on AT&T in most of Minnesota and Iowa got like a 5-minute fritz. It was just a network problem. So no big problem there, no big issue. It wasn't actually Rumble or YouTube. I select to be streaming on YouTube as well, but I often forget that I'm also there when I do these shows, because I don't rely on YouTube as a primary outlet. But if that's all, I am going to head on back in. If you are watching this later on in the archive, I will say this broadly, and to those, a couple of folks who are here live for me right now, I'd like to thank you for choosing to join me here for the Storyteller's Corner. I thank you for watching. And Lucien, not for myself, but hope you get a good 2 days off. Hope to catch up with you on Wednesday, unless you want a controversial statement. What's the controversial statement, Lucian? If you have one, by all means, let her rip. I'm interested to know, what is this controversial statement? Lucian says, Hal, the original Skynet, and Shodan are not rogue AIs. Explain yourself, if you can, briefly. Otherwise, this is something that we may have to have a conversation about in some other fashion. Or when you say they're not rogue AIs, are you trying to imply that they are doing exactly what they were designed to do? Oh, the deeper conspiracy. If it's something that you would rather rogue AIs are those operating outside of their orders. Okay, yep. So your hypothesis is that they are doing exactly what they were programmed or designed to do, which is one hypothesis, and perhaps we could delve into that a little more in depth at some point. Lucian, if you would like, we can try to arrange to have that conversation a little bit more in depth. You can always email me at byronosidious@gmail.com. The name of my channel at gmail.com. And we can touch base and perhaps go over a little bit more palaver, possibly even arrange some kind of conversation or dialogue about the subject to have on a show at some point, if you'd be interested. If not, we can just keep the conversation private. It's a conversation I'm willing to indulge in and entertain. But anyhow, I really do need to get going. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I ask that you take care of yourselves, and as always, keep reading.